There are mornings that feel like every other morning. The same golden California light spilling through the same tall windows, the same smell of fresh coffee drifting down the same marble hallways. And then there are mornings that change everything. Mornings where a single whispered sentence from someone you barely know stands between you and the end of your life. This is one of those mornings. And what makes it almost impossible to believe is that the person who saw it coming wasn't a bodyguard, was a detective, wasn't some seasoned professional with years of experience reading danger before it arrives. It was a 10-year-old boy, a quiet, observant, terrifyingly brave 10-year-old boy who decided that what he had heard the night before was too important, too horrifying, too final to keep to himself for even one more hour. Dean Martin had been one of the most recognizable men in America for well over a decade by the time that morning arrived. His voice alone could fill a room before he walked into it. His face had graced the covers of more magazines than most people had ever held in their hands. He had sung to presidents, performed alongside legends, and packed casino showrooms with audiences who would have waited in line for 3 days just to hear him say good evening. He was Dino. He was the king of cool. And on that particular morning in Beverly Hills, with the California sun beginning its slow golden climb above the canyon ridgelines, Dean Martin was getting ready to die. And he didn't know it yet. The day had started the way most of his days started. He was already mentally somewhere else before he had finished his second cup of coffee. His thoughts were moving ahead of him, running through rehearsal schedules, contract details, a specific note in a specific song that hadn't felt quite right during the last sound check. He had a sold-out performance in Las Vegas that evening, and the drive between Los Angeles and Las Vegas was one he had made so many times that it had become almost meditative for him. Long stretches of desert highway where he could simply exist between one world and another. He was thinking about all of that. He was thinking about almost everything except the one thing he should have been paying attention to. His Cadillac was already waiting in the circular driveway when he stepped out into the hallway that led toward the front door. He could see it through the tall window panels beside the entrance, gleaming black, perfectly polished, sitting exactly where it always sat. The morning air outside was warm and dry, the kind of Beverly Hills morning that makes the rest of the world seem like a rumor. His jacket was on. His schedule was in his hand. He was already late, and he was moving fast, which is exactly what someone had been counting on. He was less than 20 feet from the front door when something grabbed his sleeve. Not hard, not violently, just firmly enough to stop him. He turned, and standing in the shadow of the hallway, pressed almost flat against the wall, as though he was trying to disappear into it, was a boy, small, serious-faced, with dark eyes that were moving rapidly between Dean's face and the driveway visible through the window. Dean recognized him immediately. Elijah, the son of his housekeeper, a woman named Clara, who had worked in that house for going on 7 years. Elijah visited during school break sometimes, a quiet kid who mostly kept himself and read thick books in corners. Dean had smiled at him a few times in passing, maybe exchanged 5 or 6 words over the course of several years. He was not a child who demanded your attention. He was the kind of child who watched everything and said almost nothing. But right now, Elijah was saying something. He was leaning close, his voice barely above a breath, his small hand still wrapped around Dean's sleeve, and what came out of his mouth was a sentence that Dean Martin would remember for the rest of his life. "Don't move. Follow me, and don't let the man at the gate see you." Dean's first instinct was to smile. His second instinct, the one that arrived a half-second later and carried considerably more weight, was to look at the boy's face, really look at it. And what he saw, there was not mischief, not imagination, not the kind of theatrical urgency that children sometimes perform when they want attention. What he saw was genuine, bone-deep fear, the kind of fear that lives in the body, not in the mind. Elijah's jaw was tight. His eyes were slightly too wide. His hand on Dean's sleeve was trembling, just barely, but trembling nonetheless. Dean told him gently that he was already running behind, that whatever was could wait until he came back, that they would talk then. He promised. He even patted the boy's hand. He was already turning back toward the door. Elijah did not let go. In fact, he stepped directly in front of Dean, positioning himself between the entertainer and the front door with a kind of quiet desperation that was startling in someone so young. And then he said the second thing, the thing that stopped Dean Martin completely. The thing that reached through all the schedules and rehearsals and contracts in Las Vegas showrooms and grabbed him somewhere far deeper than any of that. If you get into that car, you're never coming back. I heard them talking last night. The hallway went very still. Outside, a mourning dove called once from somewhere in the garden and then fell silent. The Cadillac sat in the driveway, waiting. The morning light was perfect and golden and completely indifferent to what was happening on the other side of that glass. Dean crouched down slowly until he was at eye level with the boy. He kept his voice low and even, the voice he used when he needed to seem calmer than he actually was, a skill he had developed over 20 years in showrooms where anything could go wrong and the audience could never, under any circumstances, know that it had. He asked Elijah to tell him exactly what he had heard. Exactly, every word. And the boy told him. The previous night, sometime after midnight, Elijah had come downstairs to retrieve a book he had left in the sitting room off the main corridor. He had been quiet because he was always quiet, and because the house at that hour was a kind of deeply silent place where even a footstep on carpet feels intrusive. He had gotten his book and was heading back toward the staircase when he noticed that the glass doors leading to the pool terrace were open and that there were voices coming through them. 2 voices. One of them he recognized immediately because it was a voice he heard almost every day in that house. It was Dean's girlfriend. The other voice belonged to someone he had never seen before, a man he described as tall, with a flat, deliberate way of speaking, like someone who was used to saying serious things and never had to raise his voice to make them land. Elijah had not gone to the door. He had stood in the dark corridor, barely breathing, and he had listened. The woman's voice was calm, unhurried. She spoke the way you speak when you have already settled something in your mind and you are simply confirming the arrangements. She said that everything was ready. She said that Dean never paid attention in the mornings because he was always absorbed in his schedule. She said that by the time anyone realized what had happened, it would be too late for anyone to do anything about it. And then she said something that Elijah repeated slowly and carefully, the way children repeat things they don't fully understand but know are important. She had smiled. He could hear it in her voice. And she had said, simply and without any particular emotion, by tomorrow, I'll finally be free. Dean did not move for a long moment. He was looking at Elijah's face, but he was not really seeing it. He was somewhere else entirely, running back to the last several months, trying to find the places where something hadn't quite added up, and he had simply been too busy, too successful, too trusting to stop and examine them. Then Elijah reached into his backpack. He pulled out a small portable tape recorder, the kind that students used, compact, a little scuffed around the edges, with a single button for playback. He held it out to Dean with both hands, the way you hand someone something fragile. He said very quietly, I recorded everything. Dean took the recorder. He looked at it for a moment. Then he pressed play. What came through that small speaker over the next 11 minutes was the most important sound Dean Martin had ever heard in a life filled with extraordinary sounds. It was unhurried. It was detailed. It was damning in ways that went far beyond what Elijah had described in the hallway. The woman's voice moved through the recording with a precision that was almost clinical. She discussed the highway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, a long, isolated stretch of road where traffic was sparse and help was far away. She described how another vehicle would be positioned on that highway at a specific point, and how that vehicle would force Dean's car off the road in a way that would look to any investigator who examined the scene afterward like nothing more than a terrible accident, a tragic loss, a beloved entertainer, gone too soon on a lonely desert road. And then the other voice, the tall man with the flat, deliberate delivery, added something that made Dean's jaw tighten in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the cold arithmetic of what he was hearing. He spoke about insurance, a policy, a very large policy, one that had been recently modified to increase its value substantially in the event of Dean's death, provided that death occurred in what was classified as an accidental manner. And the sole beneficiary of that modified policy, if Dean died in an accident on that highway, was a woman whose voice was filling the room with its calm, reasonable, utterly terrifying certainty. Dean listened to the entire recording without speaking, without moving. When it finished, he pressed stop, and he sat very still for a moment in the golden morning silence of his Beverly Hills hallway, with a 10-year-old boy watching him with those wide, serious eyes, and he thought about a large stack of business documents he had signed several months earlier during a particularly hectic stretch of international performances. He had been overseas. He had been tired. His manager had sent a courier with a thick folder and told him they were routine. He had signed them without reading every page because he trusted the people around him, because he had always trusted the people around him, and because trust is one of those things that most people don't examine closely until a moment they discover it has been used against them. He stood up. He squared his shoulders. He looked at Elijah with an expression that the boy would later describe as the face of someone who has just made a very important decision and has no intention of revisiting it. Dean thanked him, not in a performative way, not with the easy warmth he deployed in front of audiences. He thanked him the way you thank someone who has just pulled you out of traffic. Simply, directly, with the full weight of what he meant behind every word. Then he told Elijah to go back upstairs, get into bed, and pretend to be sick. He told him not to say a word about any of this to anyone. Not to the other household staff, not to his mother, not to anyone, until Dean told him it was safe to do so. Elijah nodded once, with the gravity of someone who understood exactly what was at stake, and disappeared back up the staircase without a sound. Dean stood alone in the hallway. The Cadillac was still waiting outside. The driver was still there, standing beside the car with his hands clasped in front of him, patient, watchful, completely still. The morning light was still perfect, and Dean now looked at all of it with completely different eyes. He had looked at that car 100 times, 1,000 times. He knew it the way you know your own reflection, and standing in his hallway, looking at it through the window, he understood that it was correct in every visible detail. The same model, the same color, the same trim. The driver was dressed in the same dark suit, the same hat, the same posture he had come to associate with his longtime chauffeur over years of being driven to airports and studios and casino entrances and late-night recording sessions. Everything was exactly right, except for one thing, one small, seemingly insignificant detail that Dean would not have noticed if he hadn't been looking for it. His real driver, a man he had worked with for the better part of a decade, a steady and reliable presence who knew Dean's schedule, as well as Dean did himself, had a silver ring on his right hand. He had worn it every single day for as long as Dean had known him. It was a distinctive ring, not particularly flashy, but specific enough that it was inseparable from the man who wore it. It had belonged to his father. He never took it off. Dean had noticed it years ago and never thought about it again after that. Because why would he? It was simply part of the picture, part of the daily visual inventory of a life lived in comfortable routine. The man standing beside the Cadillac was not wearing a ring. He was wearing everything else. He had gotten every detail exactly right. Whoever had planned this had been meticulous, careful, thorough in a way that spoke of professional experience and a complete absence of hesitation. They had found someone who could pass for Dean's driver from a distance. They had dressed him correctly. They had positioned him correctly. They had even managed to arrange for the real driver to be quietly removed from the picture, something Dean needed to understand. Because how do you remove a loyal employee of a decade without that employee becoming immediately suspicious? Dean needed answers. He needed them quickly, and he needed them from someone he trusted completely. He turned away from the window and walked toward his office, moving with the unhurried, deliberate ease of a man who was simply going to retrieve something he had forgotten, because somewhere in the back of his mind, he was already aware that anything unusual in his behavior might be visible to people who were watching. And someone was almost certainly watching. He called Marcus Vale. Marcus had been Dean's attorney for nearly 20 years. He was a kind of lawyer who existed at the intersection of absolute discretion and absolute competence. A man who had handled negotiations, contracts, disputes, and sensitive personal matters with the same unruffled precision regardless of what they involved. Dean trusted him the way you trust someone who has seen you at your worst and remained loyal anyway. He told Marcus where he was, what he had heard, and what he needed. He needed every insurance document connected to his name retrieved and examined within 90 minutes. He needed it done quietly and completely, with no communication to anyone else until they were face to face. Marcus asked no unnecessary questions. He said he would handle it. Dean put down the phone. Then Dean's girlfriend called. The phone rang, and he looked at it for a moment before he answered. He arranged his voice the way he arranged himself before walking on stage. Everything casual, everything easy, nothing out of place. She asked why he hadn't left yet. She sounded perfectly relaxed, perfectly natural, perfectly like a woman who was simply checking in on someone she cared about, which is a performance Dean was now watching with entirely new understanding. He told her he had come back inside to grab an important contract from his office, that he would be leaving in just a couple of minutes. She said, okay. She said, drive safely. The line went quiet, and Dean stood in his office with the phone still in his hand, thinking about the voice on that tape recorder, thinking about how many times that voice had said good morning to him across a breakfast table, thinking about how many evenings it filled the rooms of that house with ordinary conversation, ordinary laughter, ordinary life, thinking about how extraordinarily ordinary a person can seem when they have made up their mind to do something extraordinary. He opened a desk drawer. He closed it. He opened another one. He was creating sound, deliberate, domestic, normal sound, because the house was not empty and normal sound was exactly what was needed right now. From somewhere upstairs came a small cough, carefully staged. Elijah, holding up his end of the arrangement with the focused dedication of someone who understood that this was not a game. Several minutes later, Dean appeared in the foyer. His girlfriend was there, and she smiled at him, and it was a genuinely beautiful smile, the kind of smile that, even now, even knowing what he knew, still carried the ghost of everything it had once meant to him. He smiled back. He kissed her on the cheek. He wished her a wonderful day. And as he turned toward the door, he felt her eyes on his back. Not warmly, he realized now, not with affection or even mild interest, but with the focused attention of someone watching a clock. He walked out into the morning. The air was warm and dry and smelled of jasmine and car exhaust and a distant hint of ocean. The Cadillac was 30 feet away. The man who was not his driver turned at the sound of the door and stood a little straighter, ready. The gate at the end of the driveway was closed, which meant that when Dean reached the car, the gate would open and the Cadillac would pull out onto the road. And at some point on the long, empty stretch of highway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, another vehicle would appear. Dean walked toward the car with his daily schedule in his hand, reading it with a slightly distracted expression of someone doing two things at once. He got within 15 feet of the Cadillac. He could see the man's face more clearly now, younger than his real driver, not dramatically different, but different in particular ways that matter when you are actually looking, different in a way that a very good copy differs from an original, correct in all the general dimensions, wrong in all the specific ones. He stopped. He turned, not toward the car, but toward the side of the property where a smaller gate led out to the garden path that ran along the neighboring wall. He pulled out his phone and pressed it to his ear and spoke loudly enough for the man by the car to hear every word clearly. He said he was already outside, that he would meet them somewhere else, that the road ahead was backed up and he was coming around a different way. He walked toward the side gate with the purposeful stride of a man handling a minor logistical adjustment, not fleeing for his life, which was precisely what he was doing. He heard the fake driver call after him, some version of Mr. Martin. The car is ready, and Dean half turned and waved a hand holding his schedule in a gesture that conveyed complete distraction and total confidence simultaneously. And then he was through the side gate and moving along the path between the walls of the jasmine pressing in from both sides. And the morning air was very warm, and his heart was doing something it had not done since the early days of his career when the stakes were high and the outcome was genuinely uncertain. Several blocks away, his real driver was waiting. Dean had called him from his office during the desk drawer performance. Another call made quietly, quickly, the details exchanged in less than 90 seconds. The real driver had been more than confused. He had been angry, actually, in the controlled way of someone who has been deceived and is only now understanding by how much. Someone claiming to represent Dean's management company had contacted him a week earlier with a simple, plausible story. Dean's car needed mechanical attention, nothing serious. But given the timing, it made more sense to put him on paid leave for a few days while the work was completed. He had been sent home. He had spent a week reading the newspaper and waiting for a call telling him he could come back. He had not questioned it, because why would he? It was a reasonable story delivered by someone who sounded like they knew what they were talking about. That is a particular genius of a plan built on ordinary things. It exploits exactly the trust that ordinary life depends on. They drove to a cafe in Beverly Hills. Not one of the loud, C&B scene places where Dean's presence would become immediately interesting to everyone in the room. A quieter one, off the main boulevard, the kind of place where the booths were high-backed and the coffee was strong, and nobody was particularly surprised by anybody. Marcus was already there when they arrived, sitting in the back corner with his briefcase open and the kind of expression that told Dean everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. The insurance policy was real. The modification was real. The increase in value, contingent on death by accident, was real. The forgery, however, was what transformed the situation from a civil matter into something considerably more serious. Marcus had recognized it within 20 minutes of examining the documents, because he knew Dean's signature as well as he knew his own, had seen it on hundreds of documents over 2 decades, and what was on a modified insurance paperwork was not Dean's signature. It was a very competent imitation of Dean's signature, executed by someone with genuine skill, applied to documents that had been submitted while Dean was overseas and therefore conveniently unavailable to verify anything in person. The private investigator that Marcus had already engaged had spent the previous several hours doing what good investigators do, following the threads that most people don't notice because most people aren't looking. The threads led to financial transactions, to communications, to a man with a flat, deliberate voice who had professional history that did not bear close examination, and to arrangements that had been put into place with a patience and thoroughness that suggested this had been in planning for considerably longer than anyone might have guessed from the outside. Dean sat with his coffee going cold in front of him and listened to all of it. He was very still. This was a quality people often commented on, his ability to become completely, almost unervingly still when the situation called for it, when everything in him was actually moving very fast in the opposite direction. He had learned it in showrooms, where the ability to appear calm is the only thing standing between an audience's trust and an audience's panic. He had never imagined he would need it for something like this. His phone rang. She had been patient. He had to give her that. She had waited a reasonable amount of time before calling, which itself was a kind of discipline. Not calling too soon, which would reveal anxiety, not waiting too long, which might look suspicious. The timing was calculated, and knowing that it was calculated made hearing her voice feel like a completely different experience than it had ever felt before. She said the driver had told her he had gotten into another car. Her voice was still controlled, but there was something underneath it now, a very slight tension in the upper registers, the way a string sounds when it's been tuned just a fraction too high. She was trying to sound worried. She was trying to sound like a woman whose partner had done something slightly unexpected, and she simply wanted to make sure everything was all right. Dean told her he had noticed something unusual about the driver in the car, which was technically true and entirely uninformative. He told her Marcus and he were handling a legal matter and that he would be back later in the afternoon. There was a pause on the line. He could almost hear her thinking through it, recalculating, reassessing, trying to determine how much he knew from how little he had said. She told him she was worried about him. She asked him to come back, told him they could figure everything out together. Her voice had gone soft in a way that he recognized from 100 previous conversations, the register she used when she wanted to disarm something. It had always worked before. It was a voice he had trusted completely, because it had never given him a reason not to. He ended the call quietly. Marcus was looking at him from across the table with the steady, measured expression of a man who had seen difficult situations resolved and had some experience in knowing when they were about to be. He said that she now knew the plan had failed. He said it plainly, without drama, the way you state a fact that has been established beyond reasonable argument. And then he added the thing that Dean had already been thinking, the thing that sat beneath everything else like a foundation. She still had no idea that Dean knew the whole truth. She knew the plan had failed. Yes, but she didn't know why. She didn't know about the recording. She didn't know about the boy in the hallway. She didn't know that Dean had spent the last several hours systematically dismantling a conspiracy that she had spent months constructing, and that everything she had set in motion was already in the process of being turned against her. Dean looked out the window of the cafe at the palm trees lining Sunset Boulevard, the tall ones with their slightly absurd proportion of trunk to canopy. standing against a sky that was a particular shade of blue you only see in Southern California, the blue that seems almost artificial in its intensity, the blue that has ended up in the background of 1,000 photographs of people who came to Los Angeles convinced that something extraordinary was about to happen to them. He had survived the morning. That part was done. He thought about Elijah upstairs in his room, lying in bed with a book, pretending to be sick, holding the whole weight of what he knew with the quiet seriousness of someone who had decided that some things are simply too important to look away from. A 10-year-old boy who had heard something in the night that he wasn't supposed to hear, and who had spent the hours until morning trying to decide what to do with it, who had decided, in the end, that the right thing and the difficult thing were the same thing, who had planted himself in that hallway and grabbed a man's sleeve and refused to let go even when that man had smiled politely and tried to walk past him. Dean thought about the morning. He almost didn't stop. The moment he almost said, "I'll be late. We can talk when I'm back. I promise." The moment that was closer to the end of everything than he had any right to survive. He thought about a silver ring on a hand that wasn't wearing one. He thought about the way a small detail can hold enormous weight. The way everything correct about a situation can be completely undone by one thing that is simply, specifically, undeniably wrong. He thought about 11 minutes and 43 seconds of audio from a small portable tape recorder in a child's backpack. Marcus had placed a call while Dean was still looking out the window. The right people would be notified. The right documents were already being secured. The man with the flat voice who had been so precisely clinical about highways and accidents and vehicles being forced off roads. That man's particular professional history would be of considerable interest to investigators who were even now being put on notice. The modified insurance policy with its forged signatures was already in the possession of people who knew exactly what to do with it. The Cadillac in the driveway was being approached by individuals who were not interested in going anywhere fast. There was still the matter of what came next. There was still the conversation that hadn't happened yet. The one that would happen when Dean returned to house and looked at the woman across the room, and they both knew what they knew and neither of them had said it yet. There was still the long process of untangling months of carefully constructed deception, of accounting for every document and every signature and every communication that had passed through hands that had been smiling at him across breakfast tables. There was still all of that. But for now, in the quiet booth of a Beverly Hills cafe with his coffee cold and the palm trees standing against that impossible blue sky, Dean Martin was alive. He was sitting across from the man who had been his attorney for 20 years, in a world that looked completely different 8 hours ago, thinking about a boy named Elijah who had read enough books in enough quiet corners to know the difference between something that could wait and something that absolutely could not. He picked up his coffee. He drank what was left of it. Outside, Los Angeles continued its ordinary morning, indifferent and sunlit and enormous, full of people going about the business of their lives without any particular awareness of how close the ordinary and the catastrophic exist to each other at any given moment. How the entire direction of a life can turn on whether or not a small hand reaches out in a hallway and holds on. Marcus asked him what he wanted to do about Las Vegas. Dean considered it for a long moment. The sold-out showroom, the orchestra waiting, the audience that had bought their tickets weeks ago and made their hotel reservations and told their friends they were going to see Dean Martin and were very much looking forward to it. He thought about how much he genuinely loved walking out onto a stage. He thought about the feeling of a room that size coming alive under a single voice. He said, with a quiet certainty that had nothing performative about it, no showmanship, no easy charm, just a plain statement of a man who had spent the morning staring at the edges of everything and found that he was, in fact, still here. He said he thought he would make the show. He said it calmly, the way you say something that has already been decided. Because the alternative, letting fear rearrange the rest of his life, letting the morning of a near miss become the thing that defined everything that came after, was simply not something he was prepared to accept. Marcus smiled, just slightly, the smile of someone who has known a person for 20 years and is not remotely surprised. They would take a different car, a different route. The right people would know where they were going. Everything that needed to be in motion was already in motion, and there was nothing left to do in this particular cafe except stand up and go back out into the morning. Dean put on his jacket. He straightened it in the window's reflection. He looked, for a moment, exactly like himself, which is perhaps the most remarkable thing about the kind of people who are built for extraordinary pressure, the way they can walk through something that would dismantle most lives and come out the other side still recognizably, completely who they are. He thought of Elijah one more time, the book in the backpack, the tape recorder, the small hand on his sleeve, the terrified, determined, extraordinary face of a child who had decided, somewhere in the dark corridor of a midnight house, that he was going to walk into that hallway in the morning and say something, no matter what happened after. Because of that decision, Dean Martin walked out into the California sun. Because of that decision, a stage in Las Vegas would not sit empty that evening. Because of the boy who understood at 10 years old that some moments do not wait for convenient timing, that they arrive exactly when they arrive, and you either reach out your hand or you don't. And the difference between those two choices is the difference between a life saved and a life lost. Dean stepped out of the cafe and into the light, and the morning received him. And somewhere in a quiet room in Beverly Hills, a boy turned a page and kept his word.